Hi everybody. In this video tutorial I'm going to show you two extra tips and tricks for handling your vectors inside Photoshop's CS6. So I've got the pen tool and I've got a fill color and a stroke color set up for creating shapes. So I'm just going to lay in some sharp vector points and some curved vector points. And you'll notice that as I'm drawing, it's automatically filling in, and I'm not a big fan of that. And so if you're like me and you don't like that it's filling in, and the reason why I don't like it filling in as I'm doing this is just because it covers up whatever's underneath. So if I'm vectoring on top of a photograph, I now can't see the photograph, plain and simple. So while I'm drawing, and you can see I'm still in mid-draw, you can come up here and you can basically disable the fill feature, and you can disable the stroke feature as well if you want. And then I can just come back down here and I can continue drawing. And so there we are there. Okay, so the rubber band feature is really nice. So as I'm going to place my vector point, I'm visualizing what kind of a line is going to be drawn in between. But I don't get to see that line until I click. So when I click, then I get to see the straight line. If I click and drag and I make a curve point, I don't get to see the curve until I'm actually in the middle of creating it. So again, click and create, and now I finally get to see what the curve is going to look like, so I get to see it. And again, you can see Photoshop doesn't quite remember that I turned off my fill feature, so which is kind of annoying that it does that. So the rubber band feature is over here. It's hiding under the little gearbox. So I'm going to just click on the gearbox and turn that feature on. And this is a feature that I really like, and when I set up my vectors, I just immediately turn it on and just set it and forget it. So now as I move my mouse, you'll see that now I get the rubber band feature and I get a preview of what the line is going to look like. And that's the rubber band feature doing its thing. If I click and I drag a curve, you'll notice that as I move it around, I can kind of see a preview, again, thanks to the rubber band feature, and I can see what that curve is going to do depending on where I move my mouse. So again, it's all personal preference, but if you like it, keep the rubber band feature on. Okay, so that was the first tip. Second tip is when you are creating more complex shapes. In this example, I'll do a very simple eye. You can do some really interesting combinations. And there's a combination feature that Photoshop has. So for instance, here's the before. And I'll do an example up at the top, and then I'll do the example down at the bottom. So let's say I go ahead and I block in and again, I'm going to turn off the fill feature. If I do a really quick eyebrow, and I close that up, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that in, a nice gold color, and I'll turn off the stroke. So there's that. Now if I wanted to do an iris, a round iris down here, what I would do is I would come down here and I would start creating, the second shape. So I would come in here and you notice over here on the right it started to make a second shape, and I would just go ahead and I'd create a little bit of overlap, and there we go. So those are my two shapes, and you can see that because they're the exact same color, they look like one shape to the viewer. Because there are two actual shapes, of course I can move them around separately, and I can kind of shift it around, and I can maybe change the emotion, and I can do that. So it is nice to have them be separate shape layers for that reason alone, that I can go ahead and do that. And so there we go. The new technique that I want to show you is this. Let me go ahead and I'm going to block in another eyebrow. And again, Photoshop forgot my preference. If anybody figures out how to get Photoshop to remember the settings from the previously created shape, I would love to know that. Okay, so there's my eyebrow, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill it in with the same color. And I'm going to take off the stroke. Okay, so now I want to add the same iris to it. And so what I want to introduce you to is this little button right here. So this little button determines how the next shape is going to be made. And right now it's set to new layer. So if I make an iris shape, it's going to be on a new layer and it's going to be a separate object, which again you might want. But the two that I use most often are combine shapes and subtract, and they're really just opposites. So I'm going to combine. So I choose combine, you see the symbol changed. And now when I go ahead and I draw, notice that over on the right hand side a new layer was not created. And as I start drawing some overlap, notice how they are actually part of each other, and I'll just make a closed shape. And so they're part of the same layer, so you instantly have less layers, which is really nice. And I can now hold down the command key and get to edit mode, and of course I can tweak these individually. So they're the same object, they're joined, but I can still treat them separately. And I can command click on the eyebrow itself, and of course I can tweak that. So it's a really powerful way of kind of grouping your vector shapes together. Now I can go ahead and, again, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to make sure it still says combine shapes. And I'm going to come down here and maybe I'll start adding in a little bit of blocking in of, the eye skin, something like that. And again, it's just combining, which is really cool and very helpful. And again, command key, I can command click on any one of these individual shapes. There we go. And you can see that they are treated individually, but over here, they're not. So I can still take each one of these and do separate things to them, but they're kind of grouped together, so it's pretty handy. The last thing I'm going to show you is this. I want to show you the subtract feature. So let's say I now want to draw a new shape and I want to draw like a little shine, and I actually want to cut a hole in the iris here. And that would be using this one here. So you don't want to just choose it right now. If I choose subtract front shape, notice that I have this shape already selected. If I change it to subtract, you'll see that it actually cut a hole out of the eyebrow, which could be kind of cool. I don't want it to do that though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the command key and I'm going to click away, and notice that nothing is selected. So you have to make sure that nothing is selected. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the pen tool and I'm going to now change my mode here. I'm going to change to subtract, and now when I draw, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw in a little circle, you'll see that it's actually carving out a hole in the shape. And again, I can hold down the command key and I can click on this and I can, tweak the shape and edit the shape and all that kind of stuff. So there it is. It's still part of the shape layer, so that's really nice for keeping all my shapes glued together. It's sort of separate and individual, so I can tweak it individually. And to just show you, if I go ahead and I select my background, and maybe I'll go ahead and I'll just do I'll do the paint bucket fill tool. Actually, I'll just go ahead and I'll just make another vector shape. Let me just make a new layer, and I'll go ahead and put something behind here, and you can see it's actually below, and I'll make it an easier color to see. You can see that I did truly cut a hole into the eye right here, because you can see the blue is obviously showing through. And there we are there. And you can see that it truly is showing the gradient, because I can move through it here and you can see the gradient is going through there. So that's pretty much it for this video tutorial. The rubber band feature, I highly recommend doing it. And when making more complex shapes, just notice that you have this very powerful way of combining. And there's two others here that you can try: intersection and exclude. And there's also merge. I don't find them as useful, but you never know, every once in a while. So enjoy and try them out and see how they can help you in your vector tools. Okay, I'll see you in the next video tutorial.